The Second Act. Chapter 1. The Road Less Traveled. It was a crisp October morning in 2003 when Henry McAllister decided to take the scenic route to work. At 55, he had spent the better part of 3 decades in the bustling world of finance, climbing the corporate ladder at McAllister & Co., the family firm founded by his grandfather. But something had shifted in him recently, a quiet, insistent voice that urged him to reconsider the path he was on. As he drove along the winding roads of Vermont, the autumn leaves painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Henry couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. He recalled the days when he and his wife Margaret would take their children, Emily and Jack, on weekend drives to admire the foliage. Those were simpler times, filled with laughter and the joy of being together. Now the kids were grown and living their own lives, and Margaret had passed away 5 years ago, leaving a void that Henry struggled to fill. The car radio played a soft jazz tune, and Henry allowed his mind to wander. He thought about the countless board meetings, the late nights analyzing market trends, the pressure to meet expectations. He had been successful by any measure, wealth, status, respect, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Chapter 2. A Conversation with the Past. That evening, Henry settled into his favorite armchair in the study, a glass of bourbon in hand. The room was filled with memories, a bookshelf lined with classics, photographs of family vacations, and Margaret's knitting basket, untouched since her passing. He reached for a framed photo on the desk, a black-and-white image of his grandfather, James McAllister, standing proudly in front of the original McAllister & Co. office. Henry's grandfather had built the company from the ground up, driven by a vision of creating a legacy for future generations. But as Henry stared at the photograph, he couldn't help but wonder if he had lost sight of what truly mattered. He picked up the phone and dialed his old college friend, Richard, who had retired early to pursue a life of travel and adventure. They hadn't spoken in years, but Henry felt the need to reconnect. "Richard, it's Henry," he said when his friend answered. "Henry, it's been ages. How are you?" Henry hesitated, then admitted, "I'm not sure, Richard. I feel like I've been on autopilot for the past couple of decades. I've got everything I thought I wanted, but I don't know. Something's missing." Richard listened patiently as Henry poured out his doubts and fears. When Henry finally paused, Richard said, "Sounds like it's time for a second act, my friend." The idea of a second act lingered in Henry's mind in the weeks that followed. He began to question his role at McAllister & Co., wondering if it was time to step aside and let the next generation take the reins. His son Jack had recently joined the company and showed promise, but Henry feared that passing the torch too soon might jeopardize everything they had built. One weekend, Henry decided to visit Emily, who had settled in a small coastal town in Maine. She had pursued a career in marine biology, a passion she had discovered during a family vacation to the ocean when she was a child. As Henry walked along the beach with his daughter, he marveled at her contentment and sense of purpose. "Dad, you've spent your whole life working for the family business, but what do you want for yourself?" Emily asked, her voice gentle but probing. Henry was taken aback by the question. He had always defined himself by his role as a father, a husband, and a businessman. But who was he beyond those labels? That night, Henry sat on the porch of Emily's cottage, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore in the distance. He realized that he had been so focused on fulfilling his responsibilities that he had neglected his own dreams and desires. Chapter 4. A Leap of Faith. Back in Vermont, Henry made a decision that would change the course of his life. He called a family meeting, inviting Jack, Emily, and his younger sister, Laura, who had always been the voice of reason in the family. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Henry began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I believe it's time for me to step back from McAllister & Co. I've done my part, and now it's time for a new chapter, for both the company and for me." The room fell silent as Henry's words sunk in. Jack, who had been preparing to take on more responsibilities, nodded thoughtfully. Emily smiled, sensing the freedom her father was finally giving himself. Laura, ever the pragmatist, reminded Henry that the transition would need to be carefully managed to ensure the company's stability. Over the next few months, Henry worked closely with Jack and the board of directors to ensure a smooth transition. It wasn't easy. Henry had spent his entire career in the business, and letting go was both liberating and terrifying. But as he watched Jack step into his new role with confidence and determination, Henry felt a sense of pride and relief. Chapter 5. The Journey Begins. With the weight of the family business off his shoulders, Henry felt a newfound sense of freedom. He sold his sprawling mansion in Vermont and bought a small cottage in Maine, close to Emily. He spent his days exploring the rugged coastline, painting landscapes, and volunteering at a local marine conservation center, a nod to his daughter's passion. Henry also reconnected with old friends, including Richard, who invited him to join a sailing trip to the Caribbean. As they sailed across the turquoise waters, Henry felt a sense of adventure he hadn't experienced in years. They explored hidden coves, shared stories under the stars, and laughed like they were back in college. Chapter 6. Love and New Beginnings. One evening, while attending a community event in Maine, Henry met Clara, a retired teacher who shared his love of the ocean and art. They quickly bonded over their mutual appreciation for life's simple pleasures: a good book, a walk on the beach, a home-cooked meal. Clara's warmth and kindness reminded Henry of Margaret, but he also realized that Clara was her own person with a unique spirit that drew him in. Their relationship blossomed slowly, built on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect. Henry felt a sense of joy and companionship that he hadn't known since Margaret's passing. Together, they explored the world, from the bustling streets of Paris to the serene landscapes of New Zealand. As the years passed, Henry found contentment in his second act. He continued to paint, his work gaining recognition in local galleries. And he and Clara became active members of their community, mentoring young people and supporting local causes. And though he had stepped away from McAllister & Co., Henry remained involved as a trusted advisor, offering guidance and wisdom when needed. One afternoon, as Henry sat on the porch of his cottage, watching the waves roll in, he reflected on his journey. He realized that life was not a single linear path, but a series of chapters, each offering new opportunities for growth and fulfillment. He had spent the first half of his life building a legacy for his family, but it was in the second act that he truly discovered who he was and what he wanted. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Henry felt a deep sense of peace. He had learned that it was never too late to reinvent oneself, to embrace change, and to follow his heart. And in that moment, he knew that his second act had just begun.